All right, welcome everyone, and welcome to this ICBO tutorial on accelerating ontology curation with Agentic AI and GitHub. So we're going to be here for roughly about 3 hours. I still see a few people trickling in. So just while we kind of like gradually warm up, I'll just kind of like let you know what you're in store for today. So this is going to be in two parts. So for the first half, we're going to be covering some basics. We'll just do a little bit of logistics in a moment and help make sure we're all kind of like set up correctly. Then part of it, some of this is going to be interactive. There's going to be little exercises that you can do along the way. Some of these will involve making issues on GitHub trackers and interacting with our ontology agents via GitHub. Once we've done that interactive exercise, we'll go into just a bit more detail and talk about what how agentic AI is actually working under the covers. We're not going to get too technical, but we're going to give you hopefully just enough information to give you a kind of a mental model of what is going on. Then I'll give a demo of interacting with an ontology agent. We'll have a brief break, and then we'll go into breakouts, and we'll do some interactive exercises. And we have some special magic that we hope will work that will allow you to use individually to use the ontology GitHub agent. Now, having said that, some of you may be aware that there was half the internet went out this morning, early this morning, with Cloudflare being down. We think things are all back to normal, but it's quite possible there may be some knock-on effects. So if there's any kind of glitches or things don't work so well, please bear with us. We'll try and make this as useful an experience for everyone as possible. So after those breakouts and interactive exercises, we'll come back and have a brief discussion, then go into a bit of a deeper dive just about what some of the best practices are for using agentic AI. And then even though a full technical overview is outside the scope of this tutorial, we'll be giving you some basic pointers as to how to take what you've learned today and apply it within your own ontologies or your own ontology projects.
Chris, you're not sharing screen if you wanted to share screen. Sorry for the interruption.
I'm not sharing the screen.
See it.
I see it.
I see it too.
Okay, sorry, it's me then.
Blame it on
No worries.
Cloudflare. But yes, and by the way, yes, I do encourage my co-organizers to just kind of speak up at any time. I'm not going to be monitoring the chat, and it's quite possible we'll get ahead of ourselves a bit. So just please help if there's anything that comes up. Just any participant, just put it in the chat, and we'll get to it. All right. So hopefully most of you have come prepared. In order to get the most out of this tutorial, it's best if you have your own GitHub account and you've supplied that GitHub account to us. If you've not done this, it's not too late to do it now, I don't think. If you go to either this Google form below, or you can find the Google form if you go to the Google Doc for this tutorial, which has this URL, golbl.gov/ICBO-2025-AI. And even if for some reason you don't, in this day and age, you don't have a GitHub account, you can still follow along and you'll still get things out of it, I hope. Optionally, if you have an account with an existing frontier model provider, that's to say a ChatGPT account or a Claude account, there'll be a couple of extra things that you can try along the way, but this is absolutely not necessary. So if you did sign up on the form, you should have received an invitation to join a GitHub organization. This is the AI4 Curation organization. GitHub can make it a little bit hard to find these invites. You can sometimes find them in your email, but you can usually always find them if you go to this URL, github.com/settings/organizations. You should see a big invite with a green button there. And if you click that, then you'll be added to the organization, which means you'll have, and you'll be part of what is called in GitHub a team. So this is the kind of participants team, and this should give you sufficient permissions to do a few of the exercises later on today. So hopefully most of us are there, and don't worry if you're not that, we'll get to you hopefully. So. All right, so for this first part, should be about an hour and a half or so, where we'll do a little bit of logistics. Sabrina is going to give you an overview of the fork of the of the ontology that we're going to be using for testing. We're going to be first doing some agent invocation via GitHub, then a brief introduction to Agentic AI, and then I'll give a little demo of how you can do this much more interactively, interacting on, in this case, the command line using Claude Code to explore and to edit an ontology. All right, so I'm gonna, shall I keep sharing, Sabrina, and you can give
Yes,
a
please.
brief intro to the ontology we're using? Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you, Chris. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Sabrina, and I will tell you about the ontology that we are going to use today for doing our exercises. The ontology is called the Vertebrate Breed Ontology, or VBO. It is an ontology for breed names, so any breeds of vertebrate animal, going from uh, cat, dogs, livestock, anything that is vertebrate breed would be there. We have a publication that is linked here or on our repository. So if you want to know more details about it, there's a paper you can look at. Everything that we're going to do today is in a fork, as Chris just mentioned. So VBO has its own repository, but today we're gonna we clone that repository somewhere else, and we made a copy, and we can do whatever we want with it. So don't be afraid of testing things. Next slide, please. So VBO, as I mentioned, is a vertebrate breed ontology. It is a pretty simple ontology in the sense that there's not a lot of complicated relations. If you look on your left, you have an idea of what the high-level classification of the ontology is. So we have classification for breed of amphibians, birds, fish, and mammalians. And then underneath all those four main branches, there's more specific breeds. And the name of those breeds are really based on what expert and what people use in the world. So, for example, you might see a cattle breed. There's no taxon called cattle, but this is what people use out there. So this is what we use also. If you look here in the center, this is really how the ontology is grouped. So we have a breed. So, for example, Chihuahua dog that is classified under the main category dog breeds, and a dog breed is both mammalian breed, but then it's also taxon Canis lupus familiaris. So all the breeds in VBO have this relation to NCBI taxon. That NCBI taxon helps us with classification, but then also it helps with relating breeds with a lot of other ontologies out there. We include breeds, but we also include subbreeds and variety and all those things. Everybody calls them differently. So everything that is more specific than a breed. So here, for example, you see that Chihuahua dog has two subclasses: Chihuahua long-haired and short-hair, smooth-hair dog. So tags, the picture that you see here on the right is a Chihuahua smooth hair. That is a Chihuahua, that is a dog, that is a Canis lupus familiaris. Just one quick note here, since we're here. You will see that in VBO, a lot of the names have the animal in parentheses. So, for example, here we have Chihuahua dog in parentheses. This looks a bit weird, but that was necessary because a lot of different a lot of breeds of different animals have the same name. So we wanted to make the distinction. Next slide, please. So if you know about breed a little bit, there's not much to know about it, but very often people will cross two different breeds because they like characteristic of two breeds, and then they will cross those breeds to create a new one. If you're more of a dog person, you can think of the Labradoodle, that was a cross between a Labrador and a poodle. In VBO, we record those connections between those breeds. So the breeds are connected with the progenitor breed or the founder breed by using a relation called the has foundation stock. And so, for example, here you can see on the left lower corner of your screen, the Himalayan cat came from has two foundation stock, a Siamese cat and Persian cat, and this relation can be inferred and be inferred from parent to parents and grandparents. One thing to note here is that currently we have this foundation stock connection relations only for cat breeds. So hint hint, there might be work to do on that side. Next slide, please. So VBO is in GitHub. So the source file is in GitHub as any OBO ontology. You can go on GitHub. There's a link here. There's a lot of links getting in the chat. As I mentioned earlier, there is an official GitHub repository for VBO, but the one we will use today is a copy of that, where we can do whatever we want. Next slide, please. And the directory layout for this repository is the same as all the OBO Foundry ontologies. So the ontology source that we're going to be, the ontology file that we will be using is vbo/edit.obo. Next slide, please. So the source file is in the OBO format. I already mentioned that multiple times. If your ontology is not in OBO format and it's in OWL format, don't worry. This workflow and this more information, we can give you more information about that. And so everything we'll do today can be adapted for the OWL format. Otherwise, what you see is a stanza, OBO stanza for a few terms. There's the regular information, the term ID, the term name, the relationships. You can see also we sometimes have comments. We have synonyms. We have sometimes a lot of synonyms, including synonyms that have the most common names. Next slide, please. And we also have some cross-references, and those cross-references are in the usual format of a prefix and a number. The cross-references you will see in VBO to Venum and this other livestock breed ontology, LBO. But you can also ask your agent what kind of cross-reference are in VBO. So I'm not going to say too much about it. Next slide, please. So if you were to look at the OLS server, this is what the term look like. As I mentioned earlier, there's a main name, there's IDs, there's exact synonym with the graph and relation. You can see to the right class information. There's more information also to each term, such as the breed code and other type of relation. Next slide, please. If you go to OLS and click that little button called graph, you can see that VBO, you can see VBO on a knowledge graph style with the main term, in this case, tigret or tigret, if we go with the French pronunciation, cat, at the center with the relation to the subclasses, so the Felis catus and cat breed, and the other relation to the foundation stock. And in this case, this cat has 5 of them, which I'm not going to try to read. And I think this is it for the big walkthrough, the ontology that we're gonna use today.
All right, thank you, Sabrina, for the intro to VBO. All right, so just to warm up, some parts of this are going to be interactive, so we're going to be asking you kind of questions to put some things in the chat, but just to kind of warm us up. Who knows what kind of cat this is? So if you know or you want to take a guess, put the answer in the chat in the bottom, and we can see who's the cat recognition experts here. All right. Oh, come on, some of you. Yes. Well done. Lauren wins this one. I'm pretty sure, Bill, this is not AI. This is not AI generated. I think this is the real deal. They really do look like this. Very proud looking. So yes, this is yeah, a Maine Coon cat. This is actually one of the terms that are in VBO. So for the next part, we're actually going to ask you to self-identify into 2 groups. Part of this is just for fun, but also just we tried kind of stress testing the system, but just with Cloudflare being down, we're not quite sure if it's going to work so well with like all of you trying this at once. So we're going to self-assemble into 2 groups. So I'm going to ask you to identify. First of all, are you a cat person? Or if you're not, you can just temporarily identify as a dog person for today. And sorry for just kind of simplifying and binning you into 2 disjoint groups, but you can be in both groups if you really want to. But first of all, if you are in the first group of cat people, I want you to go to the URL that we have down here below, which I believe is being pasted into the chat. And you're going to create a new issue in the repo, in the ICBO AI tutorial repo. You can give the issue whatever title you want, like something like test question. And you're going to try with this question here. Now, I think the question is probably going to be pasted into the chat as well. And you can. I suggest you try this question, but maybe if it works, then you can also try with some other kind of questions as well. So you're going to ask Claude, according to the ontology, what breeds have Maine Coon as a foundation stock? So these are, on kind of ontology terms, kind of derivation relationships, as Sabrina showed earlier. So let's give you all a moment to do that. I see lots of things happening in the chat. This is now, yeah, I hope this works, but it should only take like a minute or so. But again, with lots of people kind of like trying this in parallel, we don't know for sure. But while you're waiting for that, I suggest you hop over to your favorite chatbot, which might be ChatGPT or Claude. You can just try, even if you have a free account, just kind of give this a go, and we're going to try kind of like comparing the results that you get here. And the results that you get here should be hopefully somewhat faster. So go ahead and try the exact same question. Oh, just going back again, just to emphasize, this will not work unless you put somewhere in the body of your message the special kind of invocation syntax where you use the @ symbol and then you say Claude. And then let's while we wait for that, if you start seeing some answers, go ahead and put them in the chat. I'm just going to kind of navigate over to the repo briefly. see how we're doing there. All right. And I see some of your questions are queued up, so apologies if there's a little bit of a delay here, but I'm going to pick on one of these and we're going to take a look at what's happening. So so I'm just going to pick on one of these issues at random, so you can see all of your issues kind of in here. As it was thinking, you probably saw the kind of like the Claude flashing symbol show up here, and then you can see the results that it gave you. So it, Claude likes to make little checklists for itself, which is kind of quite handy. So you can see its kind of progress, and you might have seen it tick off these checkboxes as it goes along, and it's telling us the answer that it's found 3 breeds that have Maine Coon as the foundation stock, so Ferocat, Tigret, and the Tundra, and it's given us the VBO IDs and various other pieces of metadata here as well. If you are really curious what is happening under the hood, you can always click on this view job, and you can see basically its thinking process as it goes along. So some of this is maybe a little bit kind of like technical. We'll maybe get back to this later on. But that's one nice thing about using this kind of this Claude integration here, that you can see that as it's going along. So I'm going to pop over into a kind of debug type view at the moment just to see how we're all doing. So it looks like some of your questions are still queued up there. So sorry about that. What I suggest is we just carry on for the moment. All right. So how did your I see lots of things in the chat. Does anyone want to kind of give a summary of what people are seeing here? Let me take a look.
I noticed that Alan and I both got very similar answers from ChatGPT, Alan Barron and I. It came up with nothing. It said that there's no evidence that, no credible evidence that there's any derivatives.
Interesting. Okay, that was ChatGPT. Did anyone try a different? And just to be clear, that was ChatGPT, not from the issue tracker.
Yeah,
Correct.
Gemini gave the same result. It said it couldn't find any direct relationships.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Anyone try a different chatbot like Claude or Gemini?
I tried Gemini, and Gemini said that Maine Coon is a natural breed that developed from a foundation stock of local American short-haired type domestic cats.
Okay, so
And
it
then,
kind of answered the inverse, didn't it? So,
and mentions like Norwegian forest cat and Turkish Angora or something like this. Yeah.
Okay.
The answer from ChatGPT. So I'm using ChatGPT 5.1 and get me the answer.
Gave you the answer, yeah. I'm curious, Anna, did it, by the way, we see your background, but not you, but are you able to tell, did it go off and do a web search in order to kind of like find the results for that query, or?
Just ask what cat as a main is foundational stock. And then he said, if you meant cat, what cat as main as, and I don't know, just put in, Italic as foundational stock, the answer is Maine Coon. The Maine Coon is the only measuring whatever all day.
Okay. So that's interesting. Yeah, I think that's, we're getting, sometimes these chatbots will kind of like make use of internal search. Sometimes they'll use their own internal knowledge base, but when we'll go into some more detail later about what's happening under the hood, but some of the differences here can be attributed to the fact that it's using, when you go via the issue tracker, it's using the ontology that is in the GitHub repo as a kind of trusted source. All right, so if you did not participate in the first round and you're a dog person or just otherwise I don't necessarily identify as a cat person, you can try this too as well. We'll try a slightly different shape of question this time. So hop on over to the same issue tracker. And this time, rather than looking at the foundation stock relationship, we're going to look at kind of basic is a relationship and say, according to the ontology, what are some of the subtypes of Chihuahua? And we know the answer to this one already because Sabrina included this in the intro. And again, after you've done that, if you want to kind of compare that, pop on over to your favorite chatbot, and we can give that a try there as well. So let's give people a kind of like a moment, and maybe if you're for some of you who tried the first query, some of the hopefully you'll have gotten it. Did anyone try the first query and has not got any response or any answer yet? Either you can mention it, or if you just put it in the chat as well. If you didn't get an answer and you were late to sign up, it may mean that we have yet to add you to the team. So just let us know in the chat if something didn't work, and also put in parentheses your GitHub username as well, and we will try and add you.
Hey, Chris, is Chihuahua spelled correctly on this slide?
No, it's not. No, it's not. I noticed that earlier, and I thought, well, I'll leave it in because, to be honest, we're not in the days of kind of like must give exact string inputs anymore, and all of these agents and chatbots and so on will work perfectly well as long as that it doesn't introduce an ambiguity. It knows what you mean. But yes, it's even underlined here. All right, how are we getting on with the second question, second group of people? All right, so let's see. So I see a few people didn't. And just to say also, just if you are having issues, I recommend not messaging me directly in the chat because I will not have time to get to it. But we have many other co-organizers here who can help you if you're having issues. So again, just if you're see, it looks like maybe there was a couple of late signups. So if I can have my fellow co-organizers put any of those late signups into the participants team, then that should trigger them to get an invitation. And if the person then follows the link that I gave earlier, they should be able to get added to the organization. They can try a different question again. All right. Excellent. So it looks like, this is. I was a bit worried with Cloudflare being down, it would have some kind of weird knock-on effects, but looks like it's working for the majority of people. That's great, and it's giving us. Did we think that the answers that we're getting from ChatGPT and so on and GitHub are consistent there?
Yeah, you know what I saw from the previous chat that the response that Alex was searching through VBO. I got the term, the Maine Coon cat, that the term was in VBO, but what ChatGPT was giving me a different ID.
You actually asked it for an ID, or?
Yes. Did you find this term in any ontologies?
I see. Okay. Yeah.
But the ID were different. I was trying to check if they were different. Which one?
Yeah, I wonder if it hallucinated an ID. Okay, we'll get to IDs in a moment. All right. So, are we ready to move on to a bit of an explanation of what's happening under the hood? Okay, and hopefully the last minute signups are getting their accounts added at the moment. All right. So. This is sort of a high-level overview of what's happening under the hood, and we'll kind of go into a bit more detail in some of the boxes later on. But again, it's not going to get too technical. It's just going to give you a basic kind of like mental model of what the underlying pieces are and how they work. But basically, the idea here is that you come along and you can kind of submit your instructions, your request. It can be a query. It can even be a request to add terms to the ontology to GitHub. Then GitHub has a mechanism called GitHub Actions. And this is configurable by whoever maintains your GitHub repo. So some of you on this call I know are more technical, and you've probably configured your GitHub yourself, maybe using like the ODK or something like that, or maybe not. Maybe you're just kind of like being able to use the GitHub and kind of things working kind of automatically for you. But anyway, this particular GitHub repo has been configured to use Claude, what happens is that there's an action that gets triggered whenever it sees an issue with the keyword Claude in it. Then that will essentially, that action will then, it'll run on the cloud, and it will kind of send a query to a tool that's called Claude Code that we're going to go into in a bit more detail later on. And it's going to basically feed that query to Claude Code. Now, Claude Code is an agent. Claude Code is itself not a model like ChatGPT or the confusingly named Claude model. So it's an agent. So the agent basically sits there and it runs in a loop, and it will pass the answer back and forth between an LLM, in this case the Claude LLM, but it will also kind of like make use of tools. And these could be specialized ontology tools, or they could just be standard Unix file manipulation and file reading tools as well. So later on we'll go into some more detail about what tools it was actually using there. But what it might have been doing is just using basic kind of like file exploration tools to look at the VBO edit file and find the terms that it needs, and then basically kind of like goes back and forth, passing this to the agent and so on until it arrives at what it thinks is the answer. And in this case, we gave it fairly simple questions, so it probably didn't loop for too long. And then it will basically hand that back off to GitHub Actions, where, or rather maybe Claude will decide to kind of like paste a summary of what it found in the same issue. So that's the kind of like the high level mental model. And we'll come to, and just to kind of give you another kind of like step by step of how this works in a real world scenario where some of these ontologies, some of these agents have been deployed in ontologies like the cell ontology. The idea here in this kind of real world scenario is that maybe we have, like many of our ontologies, we have a backlog of issues in our issue tracker, and then the ontology editor comes along and says, okay, Claude, I want you to fix issue number 1, 2, 3. This will trigger the GitHub action. And then what happens under the hood is that the Claude tool is actually, the Claude Code tool is actually using a tool called GH, which allows it to kind of introspect issues. So it will say, I need to use the GH tool to look at issue number 1, 2, 3, because that's the only context the user has given me here. So it reads issue 1, 2, 3, and issue 1, 2, 3 says fix the lineage of T3 B cell. And so the coding agent will then maybe have access to tools like the Ontology Access Kit tool, OAK. So it maybe uses this to be able to find the terms that it needs in order to connect up the lineage of the T3 B cell. So the agent goes ahead, updates the ontology, adds this relationship, and then makes a PR, that is to say a pull request on the ontology, where it will then push that PR, where it will go through the normal review mechanisms that we have in most of our ontologies to auto-check that PR, where at the end of the day, it's always like a human who is accountable and who will kind of like do the final review and then merge that into the ontology if it validates. All right, so, but to take a step back for a moment, why might we want to use this agentic technology for ontologies? So we'll go into a bit of detail about what exactly is an agent, but we'll actually start with more of a question of why do we care about them so much for ontology development. So I like to give these slides often when I'm talking to a kind of broad audience about what is involved in ontology development or knowledge representation or knowledge-based curation. And, I think I think we've got a broad section of kind of like people here, people who are actually developing ontologies, as well as people who are using them. And, many people from outside our community don't necessarily know all of the things that happen under the hood as part of ontology development or knowledge-based curation. They tend to see this kind of like, hopefully well-oiled engine where we have kind of like a team of curators who will do things like add terms into ontologies or curate additional papers or curate, maybe biosamples using ontology terms. But really what happens under the hood is, or sort of behind the scenes rather, is there's a lot more activity going on rather than just kind of like adding new terms into the ontology. We need to do things like refactor and reorganize ontologies. We need to handle big complex bulk changes to the ontology, like maybe adding a set of mappings en masse. We need to do things like write logical axioms that allow us to use reasoners to keep the ontology consistent and even come up with the design patterns for writing those logical axioms. We need to have both kind of broad and deep knowledge, be able to do deep dives into literature review, work with experts, resolve inconsistencies. And ultimately what many of us are doing are building an interwoven complex model of biology. And this is all on top of just keeping on top of our big stack of issues that we have in GitHub. And so just to kind of give some examples of that, our ontologies are not static entities where we just add things like one term at a time. Change is really a constant for many of these ontologies. So this is just an example from the gene ontology where it shows an example of a refactoring that we did a number of years ago where we reorganized a lot of the top level terms. This is often a complex process because it involves obsoleting terms, but also making sure that people who are using those ontology terms, they have a pathway to being able to migrate their annotations or migrate their other ontology axioms as well. And a lot of this is not just about coming up with the perfect model of biology. There's often a consensus process here as well, where as a part of our job of developing ontologies and knowledge bases, we often have to reconcile different views or different paradigms for looking at in specific biological questions. And so a lot of this is really about, bringing experts together and reaching consensus on how we model many of these things. And you can see this highly kind of social process if you look at some of our look at the stats for some of our GitHub repos. So within the gene ontology, for example, we have multiple people involved in many of the decisions that are made in the ontology. And you can see this by looking at how many people contribute to each individual pull request, or you can look at how many comments there are on any one individual issue in the ontology. You can see that maybe the majority of issues go through kind of quite straightforwardly, but there's a long tail of issues that often require a huge amount of discussion just because the biology is complex and maybe the community hasn't kind of arrived at consensus on how to represent things. So a lot of what we do involves kind of like workshops and bringing together experts. This is a kind of summary of a workshop that we had quite recently for the Mondo ontology, where we brought together epilepsy experts, clinical geneticists and clinicians, as well as also patient advocates and representatives of patient groups with curators and ontology developers to refine and improve the ontology. All right, so just to kind of, that's my kind of like perspective on some of the broad ranges of tasks that we use ontologies for. I wonder if we can just do a kind of like take a pause for a moment and do a quick kind of poll and see for all of you, if you're, regardless of whether you're an ontology developer or ontology contributor or just an ontology user, what do you think are some of the tasks that you need the most help with? What is it adding new terms? Is it kind of like refining terms? Is it some other kind of like task? If you want to go ahead and just kind of like put some of your thoughts in the chat. I'll give you a moment or two there. All right. Oh, it looks like none of you have any problems at all. It's all going great. All right. Let's see a few more comments coming in. Great. All right. Yes. Yes. All right, and maybe we can interweave that with another question. So, how many of you here have used ChatGPT or maybe some other chatbot, and with what success? And I know some of you have used the kind of like the kind of like the agentic systems that we're talking about today as well. So feel free to kind of comment on what your experiences have been so far, but just make it kind of clear what, yeah, if this was via kind of like ChatGPT or using kind of like an agent or however else you did it. All right, so I'm just going through some of the comments. This is great. All right, yeah, no, I think this seeing definitely a very diverse range of tasks here, which is definitely kind of like has been a challenge in the past to any kind of like using automated assistance with ontology development. All right, let's move on. And so I'll go into a little bit more detail now, just about how agents work under the hood. But you know, I think many of us, when ChatGPT came along, I think end of 2022 now, yeah, we got kind of like quite excited about how we could use this to help us with some of our tasks, including things like ontology development. And many of us may have tried kind of like examples like going to ChatGPT and asking it to make an ontology of immune cell types in OBO format. And it was kind of impressive the first time we saw this, just because it memorized things like OBO format or OWL format, and it was actually able to make syntactically correct little toy ontologies. But of course, they were just toy ontologies, and the moment we tried this with any larger task, it would kind of fail horribly, and we started to see some of the limitations of this approach. You know, it was very prone to hallucination. It wasn't able to make use of any background knowledge that it hadn't kind of, it didn't have in its own kind of internal knowledge base. And ultimately, it was not really well aligned with the real challenges and the real tasks that we saw in the chat just there that some of you need help with. But things have moved along a lot from this kind of like original idea of a kind of like a standalone large language model. Many of us kind of explored things like retrieval augmented generation last year, but I think the way the field has really moved on now is into this newer paradigm called Agentic AI. And Agentic AI is really much more aligned with the kinds of tasks that we need help with. And the basic idea here is that you can give it some quite open-ended questions, sometimes very open-ended questions, and rather than it giving you the answer in one shot, just taking the answer, you know, plucking it from its own internal knowledge base, an agent will typically do things like take your question, break it down into a plan of action, and each of those plans might have steps that involve making use of tools. So it might have a plan that involves making use of query tools to query the ontology structure either locally or in OLS or BioPortal. The plan might involve doing some research using maybe NCBI EU tools or some kind of like publication queries as well. It might also involve using text editing tools and using reasoners, and it can even iterate over these tasks until it thinks it's arrived at a suitable answer. So, so the basic idea with agents is there's always a human in the loop in some way, and the human doesn't interact directly with the large language model itself. The human will interact with the agent, and the agent acts as kind of an orchestrator or a kind of like a mediator, and the agent will iterate on the task, making use of maybe a little knowledge base that is supplied to it, or it builds one on the fly. It will make use of tools that you give it access to, and it will make use of an LLM to help it figure out which tools to use and when, and how to plan actions and how to kind of carry out that plan. So I'm just going to kind of like skip over some of this in the interest of time, but really just to kind of like give you the idea of why AI is really improved massively by giving access to these tools. So without any of these tools, just using an LLM alone will rely on its own very broad but often kind of like faulty internal knowledge, what it's been trained on essentially. And when you start asking kind of questions for things that are outside of standard textbook knowledge, a standalone LLM will tend to hallucinate that. So you might ask it for the VBO ID for Chihuahua, and it will maybe answer, maybe very confidently, although these days maybe slightly less confidently, and often it will just kind of like hallucinate an ID, and that's not something that we want. But all right, well, let's actually try this for ourselves. So we're going to do another exercise here, and for this exercise, we're not just going to use just a plain chatbot, because many of these chatbots now have been imbued with a lot of this kind of agentic capabilities, and they will actually do things like go off and do web searches. And we saw some of that in what we tried earlier. So we're actually going to go and use more like a raw LLM, just like it's early 2023. And so you can't actually do that using the main chat interfaces these days, but there's still some ways you could do it. You could use there's something called Hugging Face that gives you a very basic kind of like model that you can chat with, free of any kind of like agentic integrations. Or if you already have a chat GPT account, you could try this URL here and go to platform.openai.com/chat. And that will give you a kind of like lower level interface where you can interact directly with the LLM. So there's probably a few others you can try, but I think many of you had ChatGPT accounts already. And again, this doesn't require any kind of like pro account. So if you try the platform openai.com/chat, you might see something like this. Just to be sure, we're going to pick a slightly older model like GPT-4o. So you can see that in the top left. And then you've got your chat interface on the bottom right. And by the way, this kind of interface is quite useful for exploration if you're just want to have a bit more of kind of a fine-grained control over what's happening under the hoods, although you wouldn't use this for your normal kind of like day-to-day chats and so on. So let's try this here. We'll ask the chatbot using its direct interface, what is the VBO, vertebrate breed ontology ID for Chihuahua. So I will pause there for a moment and give you time to try this out. Anyone having any issues there? Yeah, I'll just catch up with the chat here while you're working on that. Right. So I see one of you have tried that, and you've got a VBO ID that I'm pretty sure is not the VBO ID for. And again, just when you respond in the chat, just let us know. Don't just say I use ChatGPT. Say using kind of like the platform, because this will give you a different result than if you just go to chatgpt.com, which will probably do something like make use of try and do a web search, for example, to find, and maybe it might end up on something like OLS or BioPortal and get the right answer from there. So we kind of want to avoid it kind of like cheating, so to speak. So, all right. Yeah, so anyway, I think for those of you who tried that, I think this sort of like demonstrates the point that it will essentially kind of like give you the wrong answer or hallucinate the ID when it's just using the LLM alone. So this is where, sorry, yes, that's we already did that. So when I tried this earlier, this is what I got when I used just the direct LLM interface, asked it for the VBO ID for Chihuahua, and it gave me back VBO 102, which is not the correct answer. And again, that's just because it's just looking for a kind of statistically likely pattern of letters that would make sense there. But this is where agents come in. So agents are able to use tools, and we can kind of give them access to tools, and we can use tools like give it access to tools like OLS or BioPortal, and then it will, hopefully, look at its menu of tools that it has available and decide, oh, the user has asked me a question about ontologies. I think I should use an ontology tool rather than relying on my own internal faulty knowledge base here. And it will call the tool and get back the ID, and then it will essentially kind of like pass back the ID to the user. And it's highly unlikely it's going to kind of like hallucinate in this specific limited scenario here. So we'll be talking a little bit about the technology, or at least the kind of like the protocol that some of these agents use to talk to the tools. It's something you've probably heard of this. It's called MCP, or Model Context Protocol. There's a number of different tools that are already wrapped using MCP at the moment. So we're going to, here's a little exercise that you can try, but this is the only exercise we have where it won't work if you don't have a plan already on one of these providers. And so I know many of you don't, so that's okay. I'll just kind of like walk through how this would work. But don't worry, because we're going to learn how to do things that don't require you to have any kind of like a paid plan at all. But just to kind of like demonstrate some of the kind of like the flexibility of these tools. If you did have these instructions are for Claude, so if you were to go to kind of Claude.ai, if you did have something like the basic plan there, you would go down to your name in the bottom left of the screen, and you'd click on your name. That would take you to the settings menu. From that setting menu, it would take you to a list of connectors. Some of these connectors are more like kind of like built-in connectors that it knows about already. Like you can have it connect to your Google Drive and your Gmail if you really trust it to do things like that as well. But if you were to scroll down from the set of these connectors, you should see a button for adding a custom connector. And if you click that button, it's really easy to add one of these MCP tools. That is provided that they implement this kind of HTTP protocol. So this particular example is using the OLS MCP, and the OLS people have put a kind of like a page on the OLS website that you might have seen already for how to essentially kind of configure a connector like this. But really all it involves is plopping in the URL that is given to you by the OLS people into this custom connector box, and then clicking the add button. Once you've done that, you can, the next time you try a query like this in Claude, it should make use of that tool. So here's just, is anyone, I'm wondering if anyone here does have a Claude account and you're kind of like trying this as we go along, or shall I pause for a moment?
I don't have a Cloud. I have a chat GTP account, but I see the connectors. I don't see how to add the connector here. And I don't know if it's maybe
Yeah.
just...
Yeah, and Nico noticed, sorry, that these two URLs differ here, and I believe this is the correct one here. Not actually 100% sure about that, but I don't know if we've got anyone from the OLS team at the moment that can, but sorry about that confusion. But yeah, one of these is the correct one. So rather than giving a live demo, I'll just kind of like show you quickly what this would look like if you have the connector enabled in this case Claude, but it looks very similar if you're to do it in ChatGPT as well. Again, it's a very similar process. Yes, Adam, do you have a
Yes,
question?
hi Chris. Thank you for this training. Going back to Claude, how did you about the connector? Because I am in Claude connectors now, but I cannot identify the OLS connector that you displayed on the screen.
Yeah, so if you're here, I believe if you scroll to the very bottom of the screen, you should see it. Now, one reason why you might not be seeing that is if you are using something like an institutional enterprise account, they may have locked down what connectors your ability to add your own custom connectors, and you may need to speak to your administrator. I don't
Yeah,
have that.
I am using my personal
Okay.
Claude account, so I don't have any restriction when it comes to that. But even when I scroll down, I don't see. Is it like OLS, an organization?
No,
Like
no,
it,
you won't see OLS.
yeah.
Claude, by its nature, does not know. Yeah, that you should see if you scroll down, you should see add custom connector. So it's not it's a
Oh,
custom connector. It's not one of the ones it knows about in
okay.
advance. And then if you click that, it should give you the URL.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
we'll have a break
Yeah,
shortly, and
sure.
we can kind
Yeah,
of
sure.
if you're
Yeah.
still having issues, we can
Yeah.
have it
Yeah.
then.
Thank you so much. Thank you so
Right.
much.
Yeah. I'm glad someone's trying this. Yeah. All right. So once you have that working, you can try queries and you can ask for the VBO ID for Chihuahua. And this time, what you'll see is a little bit different if you just try this kind of like query normally in something like Claude. And you can see it's giving you a little kind of report on what it's doing. It's scouring ontology databases. And then you can see it's doing a search, unearthed multiple Chihuahua breed identifiers, and then it gives you back these results. And I believe these are the correct IDs here. Told you other things that it found in its search, but the one that you probably want is the main identifier for Chihuahua as a whole, 20338. So what is quite nice about this is it kind of like follows this kind of progressive disclosure paradigm where gives you the answer you want. It kind of gives you a little bit of information about how it found that, but you can click on any of these pop-ups here, and you can see a little bit more about what it was doing under the hood. So in this case, I had mine kind of like configured to either use OLS or BioPortal here. And you can see its thought process essentially. It's like talking to itself, saying the user is asking about VBO. I should search for this in these ontology databases. And then you can click on the second pop-up here and see what it was doing. And this is the actual kind of like MCP call that it's doing here. So it's still not as transparent as it could be. I find it quite frustrating that it's not actually telling me here that it's using the OLS MCP endpoint. It's just telling me it's doing some kind of query. So I wish they would fix that, but at least it's somewhat transparent in what it's doing under the hood. And then you can kind of like click open the third pop-up box and you can see it gives a kind of like a more direct summary of the results that it got from calling the MCP. And so if you either want to try this later on or that was going too fast for you, you can go to the OLS site itself, and it gives you kind of like the instructions and the URL here, so you can try this at home later on. I notice it does have the dev URL here as well, so not sure. Yeah.
Chris, just one word of warning if you go back. So Alan noticed, and I also noticed this painfully, that if you click the copy paste button there, you're still copy pasting the wrong URL for the
okay,
for
that's
the
what I
MCP.
thought I did that. Yes, okay, that's why.
And you need to copy paste basically the entire like in the usual way without using the copy paste button. And if anyone wants a quick show from how this is done in ChatGPT, just to ping it in this chat, and we can do this later as well.
Excellent. Yes, and I'm sure the OLS developers will have this fixed very quickly. All right. So just to recap where we are, so LLMs alone are insufficient for many of the tasks that we need to do. But this paradigm of combining LLMs with tools, plus some kind of like task loop, kind of essentially gives you agents, and then tools like the OLS can be exposed to some of these standard, what we think of as now as we think of them less as chatbots now, as more like kind of like agentic chat interfaces like ChatGPT and Claude, and you can access tools via connectors, and that is specifically MCP services that make use of the HTTP protocol. All right, so far so good, but what about all of the tools that we have for ontology development? How can we use those in ChatGPT or in Claude? So again, I'll kind of go over very briefly some of the tool chains that we use for ontology development. This has been covered in many other tutorials we've had in ICBO in the past, and I know many of you are making use of some of these at the moment. But just to kind of give you a brief summary, we have something called ODK, the Ontology Development Kit. It's essentially a Docker container that you can run on your laptop or your work machine, and it can also be executed via this kind of like GitHub action system as well. And what this gives you is a battery of tools that include things like Robot and Reasoners and the Ontology Access Kit that can run over your ontology to able to do things en masse, like automatically classifying your ontology, validating, and so on. And then, of course, we have the actual ontology development and environment that we use for most of us, that is Protege, that we typically use working with local tools as well. So is it possible for ChatGPT to make use of these tools even though they're running locally? Well, the short answer is not at the moment, at least using some of these tools like ChatGPT, because they are web-based. They naturally don't have access to your hard drive, which is where many of us are keeping our ontologies, at least when we check them out for GitHub. But we might ask, are there lessons that can be learned here from software development? And in many ways, kind of like there's parallels between software development and ontology development, particularly the workflows that we use with GitHub and checking out files and working on them locally. Maybe we can look at how agents are being used in software development and see if we can adapt some of those tools and frameworks for ontology development. And in fact, Agentic AI is really where software development is really where there's been the biggest uptake, I think, of Agentic AI. I think it's really transforming a lot of software development. Now, obviously, like with many things AI related, adoption is very patchy and uneven. And there's a wide range of very valid opinions that people have about use of kind of like AI and software development. But it's clear many people are adopting this kind of like full force, and this has even given rise to kind of like terms like vibe coding, where you essentially delegate a lot of the software development directly to agents. But of course, if you observe software developers who are using AI, you'll see a range of different uses, and you'll see sometimes people might even kind of like turn up and turn down the autonomy dial as they go along. But you can see this as part of a general progression from about 2022, where really AI was mostly used as a kind of like a fancy autocomplete in existing tools. Then after that, we started to see people doing things like more and more like typing questions into ChatGPT, like write me a Python function to do such and such a task, or help me debug this error, paste it into ChatGPT, look at the results, maybe paste some of those results back into their IDE, which many people found really useful, but it was quite a clunky way of working. Now we've moved on to this kind of like paradigm of kind of like agentic AI coders, and you might have heard of tools like Claude Code or Gemini CLI and so on. And the basic idea that we had was, just as we have in the past adopted many software engineering tools and frameworks and paradigms for ontology development, we thought, why don't we try adopting some of these kinds of tools for ontology development as well? And even though Claude Code, in its name, it says code, it advertises itself as a coding tool. we like to really think of it much more as a universal coding agent or a universal agent. It's able to edit files locally, whether they're program files like Python files, or even if they're ontology files as well. It takes a little bit of configuration mainly, but it's quite happy to kind of like to generally kind of like chew on OBO or AL files the same way it might chew on a Python file. So we think of this as the universal semantic coding agent pattern. And if you are interested in using Claude Code to write code, to manage ontology files, or really any other kinds of files that you might have locally, we did have a recent presentation by Chris Tabone from the Alliance of Genome Resources on how to use Claude Code. I recommend going over to take a look at that. We're not going to be using Claude Code directly in the usual way. Today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different, but just as a resource that you could use to kind of like try some things out later on after this tutorial, I really recommend going back and looking at the Claude Code tutorial on the OBO Academy. All right, so even though you're not going to be using Claude Code as it was intended on the command line today during this tutorial, I'll kind of like give you a brief demo just now, just to show you how it works. And there's this kind of screenshot here of how of what kind of Claude Code looks like. Just because of some weird issue that I think is related to Cloudflare, I'm just going to kind of like start in an existing Claude Code session here. So this, maybe looks a little bit kind of like old school kind of way of looking at things. It's got a terminal interface that you just kind of interact with, like a normal chat interface. So we can start asking questions here, like what sheep breeds are in VBO. And under the hood, this is really using the same system that we used earlier for the GitHub interface. It's all kind of like using the same code here, but this gives us a bit more of an interactive experience than doing things using the GitHub interface. Although I personally like to use the GitHub interface because it makes it easy to do a lot of things in parallel. I can just kind of like fire off a query, forget about it, and come back to it later. But we can see here that it's given us it's done some kind of like queries and given us kind of like 1,632 sheep breeds. I'm just going to ask me just to kind of like demonstrate that it's actually making use of the ontology and not just kind of like pulling these from its own internal memory. Now, just a little bit of kind of like, here's some of these with the VBO IDs here as well. So just to kind of give you a sense of what it's doing here is that it's actually making use of some tools that we have provided to it for being able to search this local copy of the ontology. And so it's actually using what turns out to be, it turns out it quite likes to use this very ancient Perl tool that we have called obo grep. So just a little bit of historic background here. Grep is a venerable Unix command line tool that is used to search for occurrences of terms within files. Obo grep is a specialized version of this that can be used to grep for terms within obo format stanzas in a local obo format file. You can of course do very similar things using tools like robot with an OWL file, but the nice thing about doing it this way, even if it is a little bit hacky, is it's very fast and very responsive. And so you can actually have it, it's kind of giving you a preview of what its results that were there, but it's telling me I can use Control O to kind of expand this, and I can see that's all of the results it got there. So, and again, it's just it's doing this in a kind of fairly hacky way. It's not using a kind of formal Sparkle query or anything like that. It's just looking for occurrences of this NCBI taxon ID. So that may or may not be a more complete way of doing things. But we're not limited to just doing searches here as well. We could, we're going to ask it to make an edit to the ontology right now, but I don't have a real edit to do, so I'll just try something like give it a kind of like quite a high level question here. So you can see here, it's first of all, what it's doing is it's searching in the ontology for the term OSSECat. Now, in contrast to doing this via GitHub, if you're doing this interactively, by default, Claude is very polite, and it will always ask you permission for tools that it wants to use along the way. And that's because in theory, it could wreak some havoc on your local system if it starts, removing files or things like that. So you have the option of running this in a mode where it does not ask you for permission quite so much, but its default mode is to always ask you for permission. And it's asking for permission here to use this oboe checkout command, and I'll tell you what that is at the moment. But what I'm going to do here is I'm not only going to say yes, I'm going to say yes, and don't ask me again to use this command because I trust this command. What this command does is it will basically take the VBO file that I have locally that I've got checked out from GitHub, which is quite a large file, and it will basically check out, not in the GitHub sense, but in the sense of just grabbing the stanza from that file. It'll copy it into a little local module. And the reason for that is just like we work better with kind of like smaller files that we don't have to scroll through thousands of terms at a time, the agent also likes to work with kind of smaller files as well. And so what it's basically done is it's used this kind of like checkout and check-in command to make this change to the ontology. And so I'm going to even ask it now to make a branch called and often you wouldn't have to tell it what branch name to use, but I'm just doing this for kind of like test purposes, and create a GitHub PR. And I think I have the relevant permissions here. So, and it's very chatty by default. So it'll kind of like tell us exactly what it did. It checked out the command, it added a synonym here, and it's given an ORCID that I think is maybe not the right one to use here. And we can talk about that later. But again, I'm going to say, go ahead, carry on kind of like with these checkout type commands, and then yes, go ahead. You can go ahead and do git add. And those of you who work with ontologies on a day-to-day basis, you've probably used not necessarily these commands directly, but you've used equivalents to these in some UI like GitHub Desktop, for example. And you can, but it's essentially implementing the same logic under the hood here. So it's going to create a pull request here. And are we waiting for time? Okay, so let's give it a moment. So the final command it wants to do is to actually create a pull request. And, again, it's often kind of quite chatty in these pull requests here. So let's do yes, don't ask again. And then what we're going to do now is pop on over back into, or we can just click on it here. And we can see it's created it. And because it was running locally with my account, it appears as if I've done all of this work here. But of course, I was really just directing the agent. So it's by default, we have it kind of like sign the work it does here as well. And it's gone ahead, it's made this change. It's added our kind of like fake synonym. And just as if I had made this PR myself, it goes through the standard review process. It goes through the battery of QA, QC checks that we've implemented for this ontology. And in theory, if this was a real ontology repo, it would be reviewed by a perhaps first by a kind of AI reviewer, but the final sign off before merging would be done by an actual kind of like a human expert reviewer. All right, so just give me a second to get back. So any kind of questions about that overall process? And you'll have a chance to do something quite similar in a moment.
So in all cases, it only uses the tools that you have told it are available. It doesn't creatively come up with anything else.
Well, that's a very good question. So if you're running Claude Code locally, one of the tools it can use is just what's called bash. So it's like any any kind of like standard Unix tool, and it can often get kind of quite creative in how it uses standard command line tools. So so yes, so it can kind of compose together, but ultimately you have control over what tools it can use, and you can either dial up the dial and say just you have maximum permission to use everything, or you can say you can install very specialized tools, and it won't know about these tools unless you tell it. And we'll kind of like go over some ways in which you can kind of like tell it about ontology tools.
Does it ever make bad choices?
Oh, sure, yeah. But I mean, it will make bad choices for sure. I mean, you will see online though there's many cases where a software developer has been using Claude Code or one of these tools to develop their database infrastructure, and they've given it access to the production system, and it's destroyed the database because it thought it was a test version of the database. So there are many cases of where it goes wrong. So you want to be very careful in giving it full access to some kind of like production system. But yeah, there's definitely ways you can kind of like guide it, and we'll talk about some of those in which there's ways you can guide it to make what you think are kind of like good choices for the right tools to use and so on. All right, so we're coming up for the break. So I just want to kind of like summarize some of the existing ways that we've kind of like covered for using an ontology agent. So one of those ways is using just off-the-shelf web-based chatbots where you use this connector mechanism. This is various downsides, like you need to kind of like a pro account typically. It's less powerful. It doesn't have access, obviously, to your local workspace. So that makes this kind of workflow more limited if you want to edit a local OWL file or OBO file. Or you can run Claude Code locally. Or when I say Claude Code, there's other tools to choose from here, like Gemini. There's a similar tool for Gemini and so on. But the basic idea is the same, and they run locally. And so this makes them much more powerful in what they can do, the tools they can use. But it also is a bit more of a kind of like a technical experience that people who are more familiar with the command line might be more comfortable with. Then the other thing that we covered was using the exact same tools like Claude Code, but wrapped up in GitHub. So you can do this with GitHub Actions. Here, the technical expertise is really only required to do the initial setup, and then it's technically not so hard for other people to use after that. Of course, people should be aware of kind of like some of the best practices for using some of these systems that we'll come to later. But that's another way of using them. But then there's a kind of fourth way that's a bit more experimental, and we're going to try this next after the break. And that's basically, we're going to give you the same experience that I showed before running Claude Code in a terminal, but we're not going to be running it in your terminal. We're going to be running it in a terminal in your web browser. So there's no guarantees that this is going to work perfectly for everyone, but we're going to give it a try anyway. And if it doesn't work, don't worry, we'll have plenty of things for us all to do. So just before the break, we're going to try starting this up, because it does take a few minutes to start up. So we're going to try this, and we're going to try and get everyone up and running with their own Claude Code vertebrate breed ontology editing environment in their own browser. So what we're going to do is we're going to do something called create a code space. And so again, you need to be logged in for this, just as you do for making the issues earlier. What you're going to go over to the same repo that you placed the issues in. You're going to go to the top page for that repo here. And then what you should see is something like this. And then there's going to be a big green button on the right-hand side that says code. And you're going to click on that code button. There's going to be two tabs. It'll probably be on the local tab. You're going to switch it over to the code spaces tab. And you should see something like this. It'll say no code spaces. And then you're going to click on create code space on main. And again, those of you who are late to sign up, hopefully we managed to get you added to the participant group. And in theory, this should work for you. So once you click that second green button, you're going to see something like this. And you're going to just be patient here, because it's not going to look very exciting and it's going to be confusing. It's just going to be this blank screen, and there's going to be this weird automatically generated name here, like symmetrical space umbrella with some like random string of letters. So this is basically a little kind of like cloud instance that is firing up for you. And you're going to just sit there and wait for a few minutes. And we can do this over the break. And then might take as much as 5 minutes. It seems to be kind of quite variable, and who knows, with maybe there'll be knock-on effects from the Cloudflare outage today. But after a few minutes, you'll see something like this, and it'll be a bit confusing because it'll look just like the GitHub window, because it's showing you what it's essentially doing is opening a VS Code instance in your browser. And even though if you're not a coder, we'll walk you through how to use this. So there'll be this will be kind of quite similar to something like GitHub Desktop. You'll see the list of files in the repo. It'll be focused on the README, which will have the contents of the README. But you're going to ignore most of that, and you're going to head on over to this orange, red-ish kind of star Claude button over here, and you're going to click that. And again, you're not going to see this button unless you wait kind of like 3 to 5 minutes or so. You're going to click that button, like this. Yep. So you find this, it will say Claude Code open. Click this. Now, okay, this is the important part. And sorry, this is so clunky, but you're going to click on this, and you might see a box asking you to log in, and there'll be some options, and it'll be confusing, and you might be tempted just to click something. Don't. Hold off from clicking. Just click the Claude Code button, wait, ignore it if you see a login box, and wait until you see something like this. And I'll be very happy if we get a bunch of us able to see this. This is a little bit experimental, so we'll see how we do, and it'll take a few minutes, and we can do this over the break. And the organizers will be monitoring the chat over the break, so you can kind of like just ping us there if you have any issues. And there should be a link to the slides if you want to kind of go through this again. So again, I'll just walk through it one more time. Big green code button, code spaces, create code space on main. Don't do anything, just wait. Keep this in your browser, just wait. Eventually you'll see this. Click on the red Claude Code button, then pause, and just hold. Don't click anything, and just wait until you see this. And it might be a few seconds. Sometimes it takes longer. We don't know why, but just be patient, and hopefully you'll soon see this. And then you can we'll work through this together. But if you're feeling kind of like ambitious, you can even just start kind of like asking questions in the chat window there. But we'll walk through this together after the break. Oh, and by the way, when you do, just as I showed you in the demo, when you do start asking these questions, it will ask you for permissions. Because you're running this in the cloud, there's really no security concerns here. You can just say yes and don't ask again to every question. All right, we're going to take a break now while we
Chris, maybe
try.
one
Yeah.
1 second, because just alleviate Sue's worry about the cost indicator in the bottom of the code space real quick.
Yeah. There is no worry. Okay, that cost indicator is fake. This is, if you want to know the details, this is tied to a Claude Max account. It is a fixed amount. So the worst that can happen is one of you figures a way to run 100 agents in parallel, and then it will just kind of like slow us down because we'll hit some kind of like quota. But no one is, this is not incurring a cost on you or on anyone here. So. All right, this says 15-minute break. That's actually a hallucination. We're going to break for 10 minutes. And again, just feel free to type things in the chat, or if you like, go off and kind of like have a coffee, and we will meet back here. So it's 12:30 now at 40 minutes after. All right, why don't we go ahead? Hopefully, if you're getting coffee or lunch or whatever makes sense for your time zone, you're back now. But let's take a quick poll in the chat. Who got code spaces working, and who needs some help? Anyone try just okay, still building for some people. Yeah, it can be like randomly slow. Okay, that's great. I see. Still building. Okay, not yet, but 50-50. Okay, excellent. All right. So hopefully, if it's still building for you, it'll be done in a moment or so. But don't worry if it didn't. So we're going to be going into a few breakout rooms next. And so each breakout room will be a team, and this is just for fun, but we could maybe make it a little bit of a competition, see who can pick off the most tasks. And what I suggest we do is that within each breakout room, you're going to have a shared Google Doc just for that breakout room. And you're going to just try and pick off some of these tasks that will be assigned, but you can just make up your own tasks if you really want to. You can treat this seriously and treat it like, you know, proper ontology editing, or if you want, you can make kind of like fun terms for random tweets or whatever you like. But what I encourage you to do is just make notes, or even just take screenshots and put them into your notes document. And you'll be in a kind of like a small group, and you can just kind of like talk amongst yourselves. And if there'll be an organizer in each room if you have kind of like technical questions. But I really just kind of encourage you just to kind of like chat amongst yourselves and see what kinds of things are working and what kind of things are not working. And encourage you to kind of like just take turns screen sharing, just showing what you've discovered and so on. And so the tasks themselves, I put them on the GitHub, the same GitHub repo. So if you navigate to that, you should be able to find those. Yeah, some of the example tasks are things like simple things like finding the VBO ID for a particular breed, or maybe doing some kind of like search, doing some kind of like summary type query, maybe looking at kind of ontology metadata for things, you know, doing some kind of ontology statistics, how many terms in the ontologies, maybe looking for using the agent to do some QC. And then once you're comfortable with that, maybe we can try a few tasks like, just like I did earlier, adding a kind of like a test fake synonym. Then we've got a slightly more complicated task that we could, if you're feeling ambitious, a few of you could take on. And so I don't expect you to memorize this URL. It's there in the GitHub repo. But what this will take you to is a mapping table that gives you some mappings between these IDs in this VNOM, vertebrate nomenclature system, and some of the breeds that we have in the ontology, and just either start picking at those one at a time, or even you can even try things like just give this URL to the agent and ask it to kind of like make the mappings. And then if you're feeling really ambitious, you could ask it to make a branch. Try and make it unique, include your own personal name within the branch name, and ask the agent to make a PR. So with that, we're gonna hop into breakout rooms at the moment. All right, how did we all get in there? Was that enough time? Did we cut you off too soon, or?
We could have stayed an hour longer, I think, to dive deeper into some of the details. But for like just getting a little bit of a sense, I think was good.
Wondering, can we still, keep testing that after the tutorial?
Well, I'll leave it open for today, but unfortunately, I'm going to have to take that code space down. But I'll leave there'll be some instructions as to how you can get this set up for your own repo. But there are there's some technical complexities in this, but yeah.
Thank you.
Alan, you had your hand up, or was it?
I did, but I realized, I was just thinking that using these tools, it could make like hackathons on like different ontologies sort of an interesting prospect.
Sure, yeah. Oh, and it looks like Bill even made a PR. That's awesome.
And then I edited the PR after I made it. So
wow. Okay, yeah, that's very cool. I see a few PRs. We got stuck in duplicate sheep. All right. Well, if you we don't really have time for a full report, so just please feel free to just share your experiences in the chat and just stick things in your Google Docs as well. I'd be really curious to look at those afterwards and see what you all found. But just in the interest of time, we're gonna hop back into the main slides again. And all right. Okay, so hopefully that's kind of giving you a bit of a feel for how this works. So we're going to take a little bit of a detour into just some kind of like best practices here. And really, we're only going to touch the surface here. And a kind of key point here is we're actually all learning this stuff as we go along. And I think this is a thing for us as a community to really kind of like come together and learn what some of these best practices are. But I'll share some of what we've learned so far. The first thing that it's really important to emphasize is that you are the expert in your own ontologies, and you probably have a lot of tacit knowledge about what are best practices for your ontology, or maybe the group of ontologies that you work with. And this might be things like your naming conventions, how you do definitions, your style of doing logical axiomatization. Yeah, of course, one thing that we try to do in OBO is kind of come together, even pre-AI, and kind of like share our best practices and try and align on standardized ways of doing things. But, nevertheless, of course, we have, we all have our own different kind of like styles and so on. And we want the agents to pick up those styles, and we can't expect the agents to really be mind readers. So at the end of the day, a lot of this just comes down to writing down what your best practices are. And you'll see in the repo that we were using, there's files like agents.md and claude.md. I really recommend keeping these in the top level of your GitHub repo and just iterating on them. They're there for the agent to see, but they're there for your fellow ontology editors to see as well. And just experiment, just see what happens if you change that agent's MD file and kind of give it more or less instructions. And you can even have agents help you write the docs for other agents. So there's a lot of kind of like stuff on there. But this is what it looks like in one of our ontology repos. This is in the top level of the Uberon repo. We have a Claude MD file here, and this is just like a lot of these things. It's just simple Markdown format, just like you have in a README. And the contents are pretty similar to a README or a contributing MD, but you basically tell it some basics about the layout of the repo, give it some tools for querying. And again, we talked in our session a lot about, will these workflows work with OWL files? And they definitely will, but you might want to use different instructions than if your source is in OBO. And what really helps it is just giving it some concrete examples of different kinds of patterns or different styles of terms that you might have in your ontology. So again, this one's OBO format. So here's a kind of like a good exemplar term that illustrates many different things like definitions, mappings, logical definitions, other relationships, and so on. Just so you're not on your own here. We've set up a website called AI Docs in the AI for Curation repo, and it's still evolving. This is very much living documentation that we kind of add to as we go along. But you can always kind of like come here to and agents are enabled in this GitHub repo itself, so you can actually kind of like ask things in the GitHub repo directly. But ultimately, you as the maintainer of your ontology, you know best how to, in quotes, kind of like program your agent. And really, here by program, I just mean provide it with standard text instructions on how to do various tasks. So you can go beyond just these simple agents.md or Claude MD files as well. There's a new feature that currently is only supported by Claude Code. So, and again, we'll come to some instructions for how to set up Claude Code integrated with your GitHub repo. But I'm sure this will become a kind of like a standard that will be usable by some of the other agents as well. We don't have time to kind of go into it today, but this is just an easier, more modular way of packaging up individual little nuggets or skills that your agent can use. And you might want to. We already have some general purpose skills that you can plug into your own repo here. And these might be skills like how to use the ontology access kit to do complex queries. We'll probably have some skills in the future for using robot and tools like that. And maybe you've got a very specialized ontology that needs to use specialized kinds of tools, like maybe for a chemistry ontology, you might want to add skills on how to use things like the Python RDKit ontology that knows about chemical structures and so on. So this is a really nice way of being able to modularize and customize a lot of these instructions. And again, I don't expect you to kind of like leave today knowing exactly how to use these, but we are kind of like building up our kind of like our shared documentation and how this can be done. And so really at the end of the day, a skill file is nothing more than a markdown file with a standard piece of metadata in the head of it, and then just some instructions. And one of the key points here is that the metadata should have a short description that tells the agent just enough about whether it needs to know to invoke this skill to do a particular kind of task. Because one of the nice things about skills in comparison to MCPs is they don't flood the context window of the agent. If you give it too much information up front, if you have a Claude MD file that is like pages and pages long and it has your entire curation manual, that can work quite well, but it can also just lead to a lot of inefficiencies and the agent getting confused with all the different instructions. Using skills and using these high-level descriptions allows the agent to kind of pick and choose which skills it needs for any one individual task. All right, so this is a more advanced topic, and this is something that's very much ongoing, and we're still figuring out the best ways to do this with ontologies. We've actually got a lot of success in getting this working with other kinds of curation that are working on things like YAML files where there's like a linkml schema, but we're still kind of like figuring out the best ways of doing this with ontologies. But the idea here is that we want to guard against hallucinations, and particularly things like publication ID hallucinations or term ID hallucinations. Using this general agentic framework, you typically see fewer of these hallucinations because it's using a tool and it's getting back ideas from the tool. But if you let the agent go in a certain direction, it can still kind of like have a tendency to maybe kind of like hallucinate a PMID reference for your definition. But it turns out this is a task that is something that, you know, we can actually plug in individual guardrails for doing this, where you can have essentially like checksums for the IDs, things like titles and things like actually the portion of text that is extracted. So we're still kind of figuring out the best ways to integrate that with ontologies, and there's various mechanisms within Claude Code where you have things like hooks that will essentially ban, you can do things like set up a hook such that robot is run anytime it tries to edit the ontology, and it will be forbidden from essentially saving that edit if it leads to robot detecting some kind of error. The problem with that at the moment is it can slow down your development because it can be kind of quite slow for a robot to run sometimes. So again, we're really kind of like figuring out the best patterns here. And you know, you hear this talk of guardrails a lot with kind of AI and agentic AI, but I think what is really nice about working with ontologies is that we've already, in the pre-AI era, we did a lot of work up front, or rather the kind of ODK team put in, and the robot team put in a huge amount of work in coming up with mechanisms to do really nice, systematic, rigorous QA, QC of ontologies. And we can reuse all of this work as part of the guardrails for the AI as well. And you'll have seen this with the kind of like those of you who made PRs, because those PRs, they go through the kind of like the standard battery of robot checks that we run on most of our ontologies anyway. But you can even use some of those checks further upstream such that it doesn't even make it as far as a PR if it leads to some kind of like problem in the ontology. Now, these checks in some ways are only as good as what you put into them. Some of us have invested time in our ontologies in doing things like adding disjointness axioms or adding customized robot checks that take into account how we do names or synonyms in our ontologies. And that really starts to pay off as you start kind of automating more and more. And what's nice is you can actually use the agents to help you build up some of these guardrails. So in the past, a lot of us have been big advocates for things like complex axiomatization on ontologies, adding disjointness axioms that check things and so on. But it's also kind of like hard to know the best places to put some of those guardrails. And this is, you don't have to think of the agent as only helping with going through your top 50 issues in your repo. Your agent can also help you axiomatize your ontology, add all of these kinds of checks as well that will increase your confidence overall. All right, so hopefully you're kind of like, you've been inspired by some of what you've seen today. If you're already working with an ontology that has these AI integrations set up, then you know, you're maybe kind of quite fortunate there, but you might even want to go further and start using some of these tools locally. Or maybe you have an ontology repo that you manage and you want to set up some of, even just like some of the basic GitHub integrations. So where do you start there? So this is not a technical tutorial, so we're not going to cover that today, but we'll just kind of give you some high level pointers as to where you can go to get started. Or if you're not technical yourself, you can maybe find someone in your group and point them at some of this documentation. So the first thing is, I think this holds for all of us here, but really this is so much easier if you're already managing your ontology in GitHub or GitLab. I know there's maybe a couple of OBO ontologies that for historic reasons don't do this, but I think most of us are. And I think we've even managed to kind of do a good job of kind of communicating outside the OBO ecosystem. So we see these patterns in ODK being used even in ontologies that are not biomedical ontologies as well. But yeah, this is the basic flowchart. If your ontology is not already in GitHub and you're not using ODK, then I really recommend kind of going back and kind of like fixing that first before going further, because everything else downstream gets easier. So one thing that we've tried to do to make this easier is to make what is called a copier template. And so this is, the idea here is you can just run this using a standard Python tool called copier, and you just run this on your GitHub repo and it will just, boom, add a bunch of AI integrations. Now, Unfortunately, it's not quite as simple as that. There's some configuration you have to do, but the most complex and hard part about this whole business of kind of like using kind of like agents, AI, whatever else is, unfortunately, this does not come for free. So you have to kind of like figure out the mechanisms in which you will enable the contributors to your ontology to access AI. And this is just by its nature, this is kind of quite a complex problem overall. But I'll give you the kind of like the shape of some different solutions. And I think there's two broad approaches that people have tried. So one approach is to use something called a GitHub Copilot. The nice thing about this is it's quite simple to set up. In fact, it's kind of already there with a lot of your GitHub repos. You may have noticed if you ever have the occasion to look at pull requests or review pull requests, there's a little box where you can kind of select who to review it. Some of you may have seen a little icon that allows you to get Copilot to review your pull request. And this is true of any GitHub repo. And so it's quite nice because it's already integrated to some extent. But it gets complex because access is uneven and lumpy. You only see that Copilot icon if your GitHub account is, I think what it's called is, and someone please jump in if you know more about this than me, but yeah, if it's associated with, if it's tagged out by GitHub as being an educational GitHub account. And I think this applies to anyone who's associated to something like a .edu email with their GitHub. If not, there's ways you can request this of GitHub. And I recommend doing this anyway, because it's just, even if you don't go the Copilot mechanism, it's nice to have this as an option. But it can be a little bit lumpy. Maybe if you have if you're in charge of a GitHub repo and like 50% of the people who are contributing have GitHub Copilot, have this kind of like GitHub Copilot educational access and 50% don't, it creates a kind of like an odd kind of uneven situation where some people can do things and some people can't. And that's just something that you have to manage. And I think this way of doing it with Copilot, it's nice and convenient, but we don't have the empirical evidence yet, but it's not quite as powerful as using Claude, and it doesn't follow all of the same standards. So some of the things I showed you, like using skills, will not necessarily work with Copilot. But it's nice because it can be easier to set up. So that's just the landscape. Then the other way to go is to use a more kind of like custom action. And there's a few different kind of like workflows that we have here. One that we walked through today is just using the Claude action. There's another one that we've been using for a number of our repos called Dragon AI Agent. At the end of the day, these two ways of doing it, they're just wrappers on what is essentially the same system underneath. But the difference in the wrappers has an effect on the UI UX. You'll have seen when you were doing the Claude workflows today that I think the UI UX is quite nice. You make your issue and you see the little googly eyes that tell you Claude has seen this, and you see the little thing flashing that tells you Claude is working on it. And you can even click on the workflow and see exactly what Claude is doing behind the scenes. But using that, it's not quite as powerful as using the Dragon AI workflow. And we're still kind of like figuring out, the ways to kind of like the balance those two. Now, the nice thing about this is if you can get it working, it centralizes everything, and it centralizes kind of like billing. So you don't need to worry about assigning, if you've got like 5 different contributors to your ontology, and 2 are in the US and 2 are in Europe, and some have institutional AI access, some don't, that doesn't matter because everyone's on an equal playing field. So that's quite nice. But you do need to worry. You need to figure out how that central billing is going to work. And you need to kind of have some way of being able to connect something like an API key or an OAuth key to some kind of account that you're hopefully not going to be paying out of pocket, and you're going to figure a way to tie that to some kind of like grant that you or your PI has, such that everyone can use this without worrying about kind of like, being billed and so on. But this is by its nature complex. There's different kind of like providers, they have different plans, the plans are confusing. Some plans you have a kind of like almost like an unlimited quota, and some of them are charged by the token. So, and it's changing all the time. So that's just the nature of the landscape here. But the key is that, you know, we have documentation on this. It is living documentation. We're trying to add to it as we learn more, and as the landscape changes, and coming up with kind of like tips and patterns for doing a lot of this and so on. So please kind of like check back on our AI docs. So but if you do get it working, I'll just kind of like show you. And I think some of this, I put these slides in because I wasn't sure if the code spaces work was going to be successful. It sounds like it actually was quite successful. So some of this maybe is not going to be super new, but you know, just to kind of give you an idea of some of the things you can do. One of the most common things that you might want to use these GitHub agents for is just taking care of new term requests. Now, we all have very different kind of like usage patterns for ontologies. For some ontologies, we're drowning in a backlog of new term requests. For other ontologies that have been around longer, we're less about adding new terms and more about kind of like managing the terms that we have already. But nevertheless, this is a kind of like a useful pattern. And many of us have GitHub Actions already set up to have kind of like templates for new terms. And agents turn out to be, yeah, in general, fairly good at this kind of thing if you instruct it right and you've got the design patterns documented. Yeah, another common use case is just making changes to relationships in ontologies. And this is, yeah, especially if the person making the issue upfront does a lot of the upfront work, this can go like very well, this kind of thing as well. But you needn't be think in terms of just these kind of like boom, 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 tick off these term requests. You can have agents do things like even like mini deep research queries as well. So this is an example from the Mondo tracker, where I'd noticed that we had a term for alpha-gal syndrome, which is this newish disease that is kind of like caused by tick bites. It makes people allergic to dairy and meat. I noticed a lot of the information we had in our ontology looked just a little bit out of date, and I instructed the agent to go off, do some research, read the latest publications, and come up with a plan for improving this term in the ontology. And it turned out to do, you know, what I think is a kind of like a reasonably good job of this. And we're still figuring out the kind of like the patterns for deep research. We actually have a deep research wrapper tool if people are interested in integrating that, that allows you to wrap a lot of kind of like the OpenAI deep research or the new Future House deep research and so on. One thing I like to use it for is these kind of like tedious, mundane, repetitive, but still requires some amount of kind of like intuition and knowledge to take care of. So as you may be aware, a lot of kind of like government URLs kind of broke relatively recently. And so in ontologies like Mondo, we make use of things like CDC URLs. And a user had noticed that a lot of these URLs had stopped resolving. So we just had the agent go off and do an analysis, and it figured out that about half of those could be done by kind of like a simple substitution of the URL to a kind of an archive site. But in some cases, it wasn't able to find the URL at all. So it went off and kind of like found kind of alternative sources to use instead. So, and, you know, again, we can always kind of like check this work after the fact. You can use this to kind of like find gaps in the ontology. You can use this for not just for ontologies as well, where we come up with patterns for maintaining things like registries. This is Harry Caulfield on the call. He leads this knowledge graph registry, KG registry, and I think he's managed to get it such that he still has overall oversight of the contents of that registry, but he has kind of like agents off and doing a lot of the research and the curation of the registry entries as well. And we're also using this a lot for a number of our LinkML schemas as well, such as a biolink as well. But, you know, we have to be careful because we always should, we as humans and the owners of our ontologies take ultimate responsibility for the contents. That's why we always review the PRs. And, you know, you can definitely get into situations where it feels like using agents can create more work than it saves, especially if you don't trust its results enough and you have to go back and check every single PubMed ID that it uses or every PMC ID and so on. And that's why some of these newer guardrails are going to become so important. But without these, we can often lead into this kind of like rabbit hole of iterations with the agent where we try and get it to fix its work and it kind of like just doubles down and does something wrong. All right, so let's just take a pause here. I think, okay, yeah, we're coming up towards the end. Is there any kind of like questions on what has been presented so far? All right, so how are we feeling? Are our minds blown? Is this just like overload, too much stuff, or are we feeling relaxed and chilled about everything?
Well, I think for those of us who haven't done this a lot, I guess I can only speak for myself. I just have to get comfortable doing it.
Yeah.
And I will admit I've been woefully behind on this, basically because I've had so much other stuff to do that it's kind of like, oh boy, can I find some time in my schedule to really start doing this? And so I think part of this, right, is that you have to convince people, because I'm sure everyone's busy, that yes, this really is worth the time to put into your workflow, because then it will make everything else easier down the road. Yeah.
I think, yeah, that's a good point. That ties into something as well. But yeah, no, just to really emphasize as well that, you know, there's a lot here today, and so we don't expect everyone to kind of like learn everything, but you know, really we want to, many of you I know are already on the Obo Slack. If you're not, I encourage you to join. We've got a number of different channels that I'm sure are useful for many aspects of your work, but we have I think a couple of AI channels like this one, ChatGPT and LLMs. Maybe we should like rename that now. I think we created that in 2023. We also, I really strongly encourage you to sign up for the Monarch Ontology seminars and tutorials in Obo Academy. As I said, we had a great presentation from Chris DeBone in the Alliance on using Claude Code. He's going to come for a follow-up, so please sign up for that, and I really recommend you watch the follow-up as well. And even if you're allergic to Slack or GitHub and all the rest of it, please feel free to kind of like email us with any questions as well. And we're really trying to kind of like form communities of practice here as well. But I really also encourage you all to go off and kind of form your own kind of like smaller communities of practice. I know many of you have other Slack workspaces other than the Obo ones that are related to more to your day-to-day work and so on. So I really encourage you to, you know, work with kind of like more groups that are more local to what you're doing, and kind of like, yeah, just experiment and kind of figure out for yourself what works and what doesn't work. And really on that note, I mean, and really just, you know, this is echoing what Bill said as well. I think, yeah, this is not something that is just a matter of kind of like, okay, boom, I've attended this tutorial, I've learned a new skill and I can start using it effectively immediately. The key here is you really need to kind of like spend the time exploring and experimenting with these tools. And there are going to be obstacles here. And ultimately it's kind of like, yeah, it's on you to kind of like figure out how best to navigate these obstacles. And just as Bill said, it's really hard to justify spending the time. You know, we've all got, whether it's a backlog of GitHub issues or grants to write or papers to review, anything else, you know, it's hard to justify spending the time. But I think it's really important to just figure out a way to do that. And, you know, there's also other obstacles, like how do you actually just get access to this? How do you, maybe you've just got an ontology repo that is just you, and the ontology isn't even supported by a grant. How do you figure out how to pay for the AI access for that? So these are kind of like hard problems, but I think we should all really just kind of like come together and try and figure out solutions. And I really encourage you, to kind of like try and make time and get that access. And if this involves going to your PI or your line manager or your boss or your institute and saying, look, I really need, this is really important for the future development of my, both for my own career development and for the future development of this ontology or knowledge base, that we get this kind of AI access and we're able to spend the time on the training and the learning, I think is really important. And you can blame me if you like. You can say that, Chris Mungle says that, you really should be carving out more time for me, where you have the pressure taken off on going through your backlog of papers and instead spend the time kind of like training and teaching yourself some of these, how to use with some of these tools. I think this really will be worth it in the long term. And so you can definitely invoke us there. And I think with that, I just want to thank everyone involved in the development of a lot of the tools that we use today, and being guinea pigs for trying out some earlier versions of this system, and for the co-organizers of this meeting.